Okay.
Hello.
Hello, hello, hello. And since it's dark outside here, we can officially say Shavua Tov. And as we were talking before we got started, ended into a brief discussion with a question from Jessica about accessing rabbinic thought and rabbinic opinion, and what's a good way to do it. The best way to do it, I suggested at the time, is to do it with a study partner as part of a yeshiva. That's a traditional way it's done, but there are some books that are good introductions. One is one that we use as a textbook for one of the courses that I teach. It is out of print. Who is Abba Arika? Our our late friend and colleague David Friedman is the author of that one.
How do you spell Arika?
Arika, I believe. Um, then Aspects of Rabbinic Theology by Solomon Schechter. I don't remember if he spells it SCH or SH. ECHTER. That's an older one as well. I hope it's still in print. A Rabbinic Anthology. And I almost had the author again the second time there. But anyhow, Rabbinic Anthology, I think it's Montefiore, now that I'm thinking about it. These are older classic texts, but they're well worth it. And I'm trying to remember the one that Rabbi Dr. Schiffman uses in his course. And there is another excellent one, I think probably also out of print, but well worth it and worth the effort to read it. It's called The Rabbinic Mind by Kedushin, Kadushin. I think the one that Rabbi Dr. Schiffman uses is a more contemporary one than the ones I've suggested, but these are excellent introductions to the way in which rabbinic thought and discussion takes place. And I'm sure some others would come to mind if we continue to talk about it. But that's to sort of get us started for our conversations this evening. But let's begin the way we normally do, by talking to God. Thanks, Father, you've given us another Shabbat to celebrate, and one that we look forward to celebrating again in a week. And we're grateful that you've given us this evening together to explore some things that are questions on people's minds, and hopefully we will have some cogent and competent answers for them. But in either way, give us clarity of communication, ease of understanding, and most importantly, as we interact with your words and your instructions for us, that we be able to incorporate them effectively in our lives so that we can express them accurately to those around us as we interact in our daily life with others. Thank you, because of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen. Do you want to tax these in any particular way?
Whatever you think.
Well, we could always do.
Well, the good news is we have several questions, so good job, people.
And some of the questioners are in front of us on the monitor. Not all of them, but some of them. We could take them in the order in which we received them.
I don't know what order that was.
Or we could just, here's how I happen to have them in front of me. What do you think? Bip, bip, bip. Or
Sure.
that works?
It's fine.
Okay. This is roughly in chronological order. Okay. This may not be a question for Stump, but we've turned it into a question for Stump.
Is there no question that we couldn't do here?
I can't think of one.
Okay, go ahead.
There is one.
What?
Could God put a round peg
In a square.
in a square hole or compartment?
Or can God create anything that's bigger than he is?
Oh, I was going too heavy for him to lift. or some such
Those
thing.
are philosophical problems, and we don't cover that kind of thing.
Okay, I noticed that you have a curtain inside the Aron Kodesh in front of the Torah. Do you consider that a paraket or something else? First of all, just so you know what a paraket is. Paraket was a reference to the inner veil in the Mishkan or the tabernacle. And so someone who's following along with the readings, as this questioner was, would then undoubtedly have had this question pop up into their minds. If it is a paraket, why isn't it torn in two? Did they repair the temple paraket after it was rent? I'm just trying to understand why Messianics would put a paraket back up after the blood of Yeshua removed it. Thank you. All right. Do you want to start on that, or do you want me to start?
Go ahead, right ahead.
All right. Well, I'm going to start at the last part of that and sort of set the stage for what happened historically. And this comes out of a discussion that Patrice and I had on our way down. First of all, this is a reference to the tearing of the veil, or
Which
the
is
curtain,
not a veil.
which is not a veil.
It's a tapestry. I know it says veil, but that would be a King James problem. In other words, veil means something totally different nowadays, like what a bride wears. And it's not heavy and not substantial, whereas that word for veil back in the scriptures, it means tapestry.
Yes.
Or like the front of an auditorium, when you're backstage, the curtain opens, and that main curtain is the parochet, not a bridal veil.
Yeah. And thank you for calling it a main curtain, because that which is referred to in the Gospels, not in the Gospels, in Matthew, because it's only mentioned, no, pardon me, in Mark, is in fact a reference to what is called what would be like the curtain on a stage. In other words, it is the curtain or the tapestry that was the entrance into the temple, not into the most holy place, but into the temple itself. A lot of people get that wrong, and the imagery then becomes skewed. When Hebrews refers to it by way of analogy, that the way has now been opened up for us to enter, most people jump into it without understanding what it is they're jumping into. In Hebrews, it's very clear. What is being referred to there is the entrance again into the temple, not in the most holy place, because what would happen is if the imagery in Hebrews is a reference to the entrance into the most holy place, then what Hebrews would be arguing is that we have not become priests, but we have become like the high priest, Yeshua. And that is definitely not what Hebrews is arguing. We have not become like Yeshua. We have been given entrance into the temple itself as priests. That should not be shocking to anyone, because 3 weeks ago, as part of our parashah, God said before he gave us the 10 words, "You will be to me a kingdom of priests." So that Hebrews is simply reinforcing that imagery going all the way back to Mount Sinai, and then the imagery of what took place when Yeshua died. So, when Yeshua died, there was an earthquake, and with the earthquake, the temple curtain or tapestry was torn in half. That is in keeping, by the way, that tapestry into the temple was, Josephus tells us, decorated or embroidered as if it were a starry sky or the heavens. So what one would think of when they saw that happen is that the heavens were torn open. In Mark, the same term, Mark uses the same term for at Yeshua's tevilah, when he went through the mikvah. The heavens were torn open. So for Mark, it forms both the beginning and the end of Yeshua's ministry. That's a literary, I want to call it convention. That's close enough at this case.
Sure.
And it's trying to make a point. Now, now this is a commercial, so I've announced it as a commercial. I think it was just a couple weeks ago. I did a drosh during our service here, and I looked at the beginning of Mark, and if I remember correctly, we also looked at this particular phenomenon in Mark, the tearing of the heavens being opened and the tearing of the curtain of the curtain of entry into the temple. Commercial part 2, if you missed that or can't get a hold of it, toward the end of the course that I'm teaching now, Jewish Roots and Foundations of Scripture 2, or the Apostolic Writings, I will be going into that when I look at the Gospel of Mark. Maybe not so terribly far toward the end. That should be coming up in just several weeks. Anyhow, so there you go. 2-part commercial. Back to where we were talking about. Okay. After it was torn, first of all, we have to identify what was torn. Then we have to identify when it was torn. And then we've got to identify if it was repaired. So here we go. When it was torn was at his death and with the earthquake. What was torn was the outer curtain to the temple. In Jewish tradition, there is a practice, a custom, that when someone dies, family members will tear a part of their clothes in mourning. Now set that up as the background for what took place. Yeshua dies, and the father expresses his grief how? By tearing something of his own. So that is another element of the imagery that you find in the gospel accounts for why you saw or they saw what they saw. So you need to understand it that way. Was it repaired? Oh yes, it was repaired very quickly. And in fact, it was still in place and still in use when we get to the book of Acts, and certainly even as late as Acts 21. You have, and again, commercial for the course. This will come up towards the end of the course as well. You find that the apostles, and particularly the Rabbi Paul, offers sacrifices in the temple. People say, well, I thought Yeshua did away with that. No, he did not. The theology that teaches that is a historically inaccurate theology, because you've got the Rabbi Rav Shaul offering sacrifices at least as late as Acts chapter 21, and he references the fact that he does that at the very end of the book, Acts 28. Okay? The Haftarah for this weekend's Parsha is Ezekiel 43. Ezekiel 43 is right in the middle of the section of Ezekiel that looks forward to the third temple. And in that third temple, you will once again have sacrifices being made. Okay? So all of that needs to be imported into our understanding of what takes place with the tearing of that temple curtain, and with Yeshua and his relationship with the sacrifices. What is Yeshua's relationship to the sacrifices? For that, then you will have to come back for the course later on this semester. Your comment on the Parashat of your own Kodesh.
What about it?
What it is and what isn't.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Okay. When we first had started the conversation, Patrice's initial response was the curtain inside the Aron Kodesh.
In other words, what we have in our sanctuary here, That's the Aron Kodesh.
Yes.
That's why I was confused
Okay,
about what you were saying.
Right. The Aron Kodesh is the cabinet or the ark that houses the Torah in synagogues. And they will have doors plus a curtain of some sort in front of it. Okay. Patrice's comment was, the Aron Kodesh is not the temple.
It's not the temple.
It's just as simple as that. It's not the temple. It is something else. It is the cabinet that houses the Torah.
Mm-hmm. And any other scripture scrolls you happen to have. We have a book of Esther in there.
We have a Megillah and we have a Haftarah scroll in there as well. And many synagogues will have multiple scrolls in there. So it is not.
It's not the temple.
It's not the temple. So it's not, and it's not intended to be representative of the curtain in front of the temple, because if it did, what would that curtain look like? An image of the starry sky or the heavens. And as frequently as I've seen many nicely decorated curtains for...
I don't think I have seen those.
Well, I was thinking about the ones we saw when we were in the... did we see any in Prague? But we definitely saw one in Berlin, in that synagogue.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Prague.
Yeah.
I don't know if we saw the curtain, but...
They're very nicely done. They're very decorative, but none of them have the image of the heavens on it. So, it is not a parochet, and the blood of Yeshua did not remove it, even in the temple. The death of Yeshua caused it to be torn because Papa said, my son has died, and because Mark pointed out that, in a sense, the curtain that first revealed who Yeshua was at his Tevilah now reveals him more fully at his execution.
And aren't we told what direction it tears?
Top to bottom.
It toward top to bottom.
Yep.
So once again, the imagery is of God tearing his clothes.
Yeah. I think we got that covered. Yeah, perhaps.
Okay.
Any questions from any of you related to it? Okay, that reminded me that we have violated custom. We talked about custom. We violated custom.
Who did?
We did. My fault. Normally, we start out doing what? Asking if any of you
Any
who
of
are
the
with
live
us,
people have
and then
any
those
questions.
on the monitor have any questions.
Yeah.
So, ladies, any questions? Okay. And as it turns out, those in front of us are also just ladies. I don't know. The men bailed on us this week.
They miss out.
Okay. Ladies, any questions from you other than you may have submitted by way of email? Okay. Then, at what point did the Gentiles separate from the early Messianic synagogues to form their own church? And church is put in quotation marks here. At what point did they, and then the question is, and why? Further question, and why? Or did some Gentile believers form their own church apart from the Jewish believers right from the beginning? Okay, again, one question that blossoms into several. Do you want to hop in here, or do you want me to start?
No, I can. When we picture early congregations, we need to have the historical background correct. The first Gentiles who wanted to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whether or not they believed in Yeshua, they wouldn't like kneel in the street and say, oh, I know I should be worshiping you, God, and then go and have a group of people who were coming from totally Gentile and probably godless backgrounds, and they don't meet together. That's not how it worked. So, back in even before Yeshua's life, but you had Gentiles who would go to a synagogue and say, oh, or go to a rabbi and say, I'm interested in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I want to learn more about them. Here's what the rabbi said: you need to come to our services. So that was what you did with someone who was who was inquiring about worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because remember, you could choose from various gods and various religious viewpoints in those days. And so, what any interested Gentiles were basically instructed to do is go to a synagogue. And as you're sitting there in the synagogue, you will learn little by little about Judaism. And those make a somewhat long story short. So those Gentiles who are interested, who attended a synagogue on a regular basis, and yes, they were allowed to sit in a synagogue. I have heard some very dumb ideas that no Gentiles could be with any Jews, that the Jews didn't want that. That's not true. That is misunderstanding several points there. But anyway, anyone could go to a synagogue services as long as you behaved yourself and you were there for serious purposes. That way, you would learn about how the worshipers of this particular God would act and what that God wanted them to do. And they would learn it through the Jewish viewpoint. There weren't random Gentile believers walking down the street, or Gentiles who were walking down the street and all of a sudden they believe that the God of Jacob is their God too. That it didn't happen like that. So the beginning Gentiles, they were more or less part of synagogues. They identified with the synagogue. Now, they might go on and literally convert to Judaism. That might happen. But when I did my studies in this particular story, and these were mainly Christian authors, the Christian authors said a lot of them did not convert, but they lived in the lifestyle of those that would get along with Jewish people. In other words, the Noahide commandments. And if you are unfamiliar with the Noahide commandments, it's another long story. But in general, so these people who attended a synagogue and were regulars, whether they converted or not, they were called God-fearers. That was their technical name. And the God-fearers were these interested Gentiles. Is that a good enough beginning for that? So as long as everybody understands that when we say the Jewish, after the crucifixion and resurrection, the Jewish people in Jerusalem turned to Yeshua, yes, they did. And synagogues were affected by this. I'm sure that was part of the struggle about what's going on here. This is crazy. We have to look into this. But this is the way Gentiles who were interested came. They came through being taught Jewishness in the synagogues, rather than being well-intentioned Gentile people who all of a sudden fall down. And yeah, anyway.
For more on that, this is a commercial. You need to read Patrice's chapter in the Enduring Paradox. The chapter is called Modern Day God-Fearers. You'll get all the details plus what she's already shared with you as well in that. So, these Gentiles attach themselves to the Jewish community and to the Jewish synagogue. And how do I want to transition into this? Because I'm thinking three different thoughts, and I want to try to put them in the best logical, chronological order. Okay, that same idea Patrice suggested and the rabbis taught was then continued in the early Messianic movement among the earliest followers of Yeshua. It is most clearly mentioned in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 15. The question had come up in previous chapters. All right, we now have Gentiles who are becoming part of this Messianic faith, this Messianic movement of Yeshua's. What should be required of them? And there's a major discussion on that in Acts chapter 15. And the conclusion is in verses 19 to 21. And in effect, what that conclusion says, as Patrice already mentioned, and as the rabbis taught, Gentiles do not need to convert to Judaism to be part of this Messianic community of Yeshua's, this Messianic movement. But there's several things they need to do. And then they list 4 things that they needed to do beginning in Acts 15, 19. It was already part of the discussion earlier in Acts 15 as well. Those 4 things were exactly the same 4 things that were required of Gentiles who wanted to associate themselves with the Jewish community, were required of Gentiles according to the teachings of Hillel. In effect, Acts 15 is quoting the opinion of Hillel on this very same question. Why did Hillel mention these particular items? Because, as Patrice already pointed out, they were part of the Noahide covenant or commandments. But someone will say, but wait a second, the Noahide covenant or commandments or contract by this time was understood to have 7 components. And you're right, it did have 7 components. Why only 4 of the 7? Well, because the Roman Empire was already enforcing the other 3. And if you weren't following the other 3, you wouldn't have qualified for these 4 because you'd have been dead. So that's probably what was behind Hillel's condensation, and as well as the one in Acts 15. Acts 15, verse 21, after 19 and 20 set out these requirements, then begins with the Greek term gar. Greek term gar is the word for 4. It's an extension or explanatory built on what has taken place. In some of the Greek classes that I took many years ago, my Greek professors would say, so you have a 4 here. The question you need to ask when you have a 4, and my hermeneutics professors did the same thing. Why is the 4 there? No. Yeah, why is the 4 there or therefore? Mm-hmm. It is meant to be an extension, like I said, of or built on the previous conversation. After the 4, you say, because the text says, for Moses is taught in the synagogues. In other words, if you want more, if you want to go further, if you want more than the basics and you want some stuff that is deeper, here's where you get the stuff that's deeper. Where? Moses is taught in the synagogues. So that was the way in which the early Messianic Jewish movement, Yeshua's movement, taught this particular relationship. Now, if you look at the book of Acts, you will find that Rav Shaul, who was the main person I guess you could say that, was one of the major players in getting in the message going out to the Gentile world. When you look at what he did, because he's often called the apostle to the Gentiles, look at what he did in Acts. At every place he goes in Acts, he goes to the synagogue first. And I think it's in Acts chapter 17, verse 2, it specifically says that's what his custom was. Why? Because he never removed himself from Judaism, because he wanted to make sure the message of Yeshua's movement went to the Jewish people, but also because of what we've already learned. What did he find in the synagogues and in the Jewish community? God-fearers, Gentiles, who were already prepared to take in this message. So,
because he went to synagogues, he didn't just go wander on the streets in this town and in some city. He would go to a synagogue and then he would see the Gentile, the God-fearers. And he wouldn't be shocked by that because that's what they expected.
Yeah. Okay, now, I mentioned this in, did I mention it last night or did I think about mentioning it last night? Anyhow, yes, a scholar whose expertise is Second Temple Judaism, a man by the name of Samuel Bagatti, in a book called The Church According to the Circumcision, expressly says that before there were any Gentile followers of Yeshua's movement, there were already 100,000 Jewish people. So the first 100,000 followers of Yeshua's movement were Jews before any Gentiles got involved. And I also mentioned this last night. A person who's called the father of church history, a man by the name of Neander, estimated that by the end of the first century in Israel alone, there were over 1 million followers, Jewish followers of Yeshua. And the population of Israel at that time was somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million. So that's the nature of how this movement began. This movement, as connected with the larger Jewish community, the mainstream Jewish community, was very much intact and vibrantly attached to the Jewish community, at least until the 7th century. We've got archaeological and historical evidence for that. 7th century is the rise of Islam, by the way. Now, however, very early, and an indicator of this, by the way, is a 2nd century document called the Didache. The title is Greek, but the stuff in it is very, very Jewish. And you'll find out if you read the Didache just how Jewish this 2nd century movement of Yeshua's is. Something else took place in the 2nd century that began to lay a foundation for stuff later. And this gets to some of the other part of this question. Dude came along by the name of Marcion. And Marcion decided that the scriptures, as such, were no longer valid. So basically,
You mean the Old Testament?
he also eliminated parts of the emerging Newer Testament canon.
Oh, did he?
But yes, but he basically jettisoned the whole of the Older Testament as no longer relevant. And that's part of what's called Marcion's canon.
Sometimes it's called Marcionism,
Yes, and
just to disavow any part of the Older Testament.
that is correct. And you can find both of these things if you hunt up Wikipedia. So
Just type it into your Google machine.
copy it in your Google machine. Okay, so now, unfortunately, beginning as early as the 2nd century, in addition to Marcion, there was developing within the larger movement, which now included bunches of Gentiles, people who brought with them, who had not left behind all of their paganism and therefore brought some of it with them into this movement, began to become distant from Judaism or from Jewish tradition and Jewish customs. And they gradually became anti-Jewish. And by the time of the 4th century, there were, which is the century usually that is associated with what are called the church councils. By the time in the 4th century, there was stuff being promulgated that said, that basically forbid followers of Yeshua from doing or following anything Jewish. So that's a very quick and condensed summary of Jewish involvement in Yeshua's movement, Gentile involvement in the Jewish movement, while they were together and then as they began to separate. Um, by the fourth century, um, one of what was called the early church leaders, a man by the name of Chrysostom, wrote, and I quote, I think in his fifth treatise, um, "It is the Christian's duty to hate the Jews," end quote. So that's how strong he had become by the fourth century. Um, by the turn of the fourth and fifth century, Augustine um, could write that the Jewish people, as he put them, are the witness people of God, and by that he was saying they bear witness to the fact that God has judged them and has set them aside. So all that plays into into the separation between Jews and Gentiles in the early movement. So, did some Gentile believers form their own church apart from the Jewish believers right from the beginning? No, from the beginning it was not the case, but later on it was the case.
Is it fair to say that once the belief left just the confines of Israel, that's when things started to go awry? Would you say
Yes.
that is fair to say?
Yes. That reminded me of two books. And I can only think of one. Edited by Oscar Scarsone, a Scandinavian scholar, Skarsaune. Jewish Believers in Jesus is the book. That focuses on the Jewish end of things, and his other book, whose title skips me, deals with the church as it's separated, or the non-Jewish part of Yeshua's movement as it's separated from the Jewish movement. Boy, I wish I could remember what the title of that one was.
It'll come to you.
It may come to me. So yes, this is an important topic, a complex topic, but hopefully we've answered that satisfactorily. Any questions on the stuff that this has raised?
I have a question. If a lot of times I get in discussion with my friends, Gentile friends, about kosher, and I was wondering, since Noah knew the difference between clean and unclean animals, why didn't we ever consider part of the Noahide laws to keep a more kosher diet?
Elaborate a little further. I don't want to misread what you just asked.
Well, it occurred to me that if Noah knows the difference between clean and unclean animals, then he has some idea
Right.
of what he should and should not eat.
Correct.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, that's never included in any Christian church about the, following the Noahide commandments. Nobody ever brings up the idea of eating kosher, and I was just curious about that.
That's a good observation and a good question. Yes, I think part of it may be due to the fact that the guidelines that are listed in the Noahide covenant do not include either eating or not eating from clean or unclean animals. The guidelines don't. But if you read the larger, so it's not found in the so-called content. But if you read the larger context, which you have now, in effect, elaborated on for us, certainly Noah knew the difference. And you will recall that he took 7 of each kind of clean animal, but only a pair of each kind of unclean animal into the ark, and he only sacrificed from the clean animals. And so you can draw your application from that. But when we get to the Acts 15 and the Second Temple situation, seeing that as part of the background, you need to also see something else that's part of the background. When Jewish people ate, what did they consider as food? Only meat taken from kosher animals. So meat taken from non-kosher animals wasn't even considered meat or food in
It
the
wouldn't
Jewish.
be labeled food at all.
Yes. So when you
Just
see
like snake is not food to us, right? Dogs, not food for us. We don't classify them as possible food. They're never going to be possible food. Kind of. Yeah.
but other cultures do.
Other cultures have no problem with this.
Okay, so when you read food in the Newer Testament, guess what it's referring to? Even if it doesn't say it's
By
kosher
default.
food.
By default.
It is kosher stuff. Now, one of the main implications and consequences in a good sense of Gentiles being part of the Jewish community was that they would share meals together. It was look, we do it in our own culture, right? If you're having a relationship with someone, if they're part of your family, guess what? You eat together. And you can remember your good Thanksgiving times together, both those with uncles who were saying stuff that was in agreement with everybody else, or as they say nowadays, or uncles who didn't. But you ate the same stuff. So the Gentiles then, who were part of the early Messianic movement, would have been kosher keeping. One, because they started out in conjunction with and connected to the Jewish community. And number two, if you're going to eat with Jews, you're going to eat what Jews eat. Fair enough? Therefore, that would have been unnecessary to say in Acts 15. It was a given. It was a cultural given. Does that make sense? If you're going to share a meal together, then what's going to be the meal that you share together? Kosher.
Also, part of in Acts 15, it's not just the animals that were eaten, it was how they were killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's another very important part of kosher. And it says here, abstain from food polluted by idols. In other words, you don't know how it's been killed, so don't eat that stuff. From the meat of strangled animals. In other words, you can't strangle an animal and then eat it. That'd be bad. You need to slit their throat and make sure their blood is drained before you cook it. And it also says, and refrain from blood. And that's another allusion to it needs to be prepared in a specific way. It's not just that the animal is a good animal or not to be eaten. It's how it's killed. Because always, in all cases, the important thing, not just the meat is the right animal, but that almost every single molecule of blood has been taken away from it so that you're not eating blood. We mentioned this. We were teaching in Germany to a very lovely, lovely Christian group. Very, very sweet people. We enjoyed them very much.
And we enjoyed where we were teaching because we were teaching in a castle and they housed us in the castle in which we taught. But go ahead.
Oh, that was cool. So I don't even know why we brought this up, but
we were teaching on Acts 15.
Acts 15.
Yeah.
And so it got real quiet.
Deathly still.
John asked, "Are there any questions?" It got real quiet, and I'm going, "What happened? What happened?" And one of their leaders stood up and said, "Why did no one tell us that we should not be eating blood? No one explained this to us. And in Germany, we have many kinds of blood that we eat as sausage, etc. Just like, Scottish people eat sheep's blood in their sausage. So it's a sort of a regular thing in many countries of the world. But he was mortified that he didn't know. And he said, if we would have known, we would have never eaten this. And I don't know, we didn't have a follow-up story. We don't know exactly what they then did as far as keeping that or not keeping it, but he was just mortified by this because he had never been taught it, even though he was a good Christian and knew the book of Acts. Nobody had I guess those were the verses he skipped over, or that church skipped over those verses because, they're not for us, and went on to other stories in the book of Acts.
Yes. Yeah, blood sausage was one of their favorite meat. And he, in fact, referenced blood sausage as being a common meal. So, yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about that same interaction. I can picture the guy, too.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? All right.
So we're done with that?
We're
Really?
done with it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, let's take another look at it. Did we miss
I'll
something?
be reading over here. You go on. Oh, we have that, the anti-Semitism.
Oh, well, no, we've got.
I know. Okay, so that's not going to take us very long, this first one.
No. All right. The next question that came in to us just a couple of days ago is, what is Reconstructionist Judaism? All right. What is Reconstructionist Judaism? All right, let me set the historical context for you. By the way, I will forget this if I don't say it up front. While our daughter Eve was in school in Chicago, Northwestern University, did she get paid for this?
Yeah.
Yeah. She got paid to be a Shabbat school teacher at a.
I thought she was like a babysitter. I don't think she was a teacher.
No, she was a teacher.
Okay, we'll ask her.
I thought she actually did some teaching.
We'll ask her tomorrow.
Okay, we'll have to double check this. She was asked to. She was paid by a Reconstructionist synagogue to be part of the synagogue staff. They're anything but messianic. And in fact, if they are classical Reconstructionist synagogues, then they would not necessarily have believed in a Messiah at all.
Or God is iffy.
Yes.
There's not a belief really in a strong God.
Judaism, as it developed, for lack of a better term, denominationally, developed something like this for many years, decades, centuries. All of Judaism was basically what we would call traditional Judaism. In the 18th century, you have, if I remember my dates correctly, you've got the arrival of the one who's called the Baal Shem Tov, and you've got the launching of what is Hasidism in its modern form. But even that was not, in a sense, a separate denomination. Hasidism was, how should I put it? There was pushback of Hasidism by those who call themselves mitnagdim. If you looked at the beliefs and the practices of Hasidism and mitnagdim, you would find that they believed the same thing. It was their perspective and emphasis that differed. Coming now into I think the roots go back into the end of the 19th century. As I had it for a second, you have the impact of what's called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment impacted religions across the board, whether they were Protestants or Catholics, but also Jews. As part of the impact of the Enlightenment, large segments of the Jewish community wanted to become more modern or up-to-date or contemporary. And that included among its religions. And so there was a questioning, both in Protestant and Catholic circles, as well now in Jewish circles, about the historicity of the biblical texts. And as, pardon me, this took hold, in Judaism, a non-traditional form of Judaism emerged. It was called Reform Judaism, or became known as Reform Judaism. As things progressed, there were some Jews who were uncomfortable with Reform Judaism, and that's spelled without an ED, by the way, with Reform Judaism and with traditional Judaism, which we now call Orthodox Judaism. and they said, eh, meh. And that then resulted in the very end of the 19th century in the emergence of what we now call conservative Judaism. I mentioned Solomon Schechter earlier. He was one of the guiding lights of conservative Judaism. All right, now we're moving into the 20th century. And there are some Jews who, larger groups of Jews, who now look at Judaism's three main groupings, Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, and they say,
Meh.
and I think it's either 1937 or 1939, if I get my dates correctly, Mordecai Kaplan emerged as the founder of another kind of Judaism.
Was he an American?
I think he was an American. Not Orthodox, not Reform, not conservative, but he came out of the conservative movement and, in a sense, pioneered a group that was, in some sense, even further from traditional Judaism than Reform Judaism, but in some sense closer to traditional Judaism in that it was conservative. In its practices, it was very conservative. In other words, the traditions were maintained, but what they believed in as far as God was concerned was they weren't sure about a God at all. At best, God was a force, not a person, and that's at best. So they were, in that sense, agnostic as they emerged. I don't know. Look, all the forms of Judaism I mentioned developed down through the centuries. I don't know, frankly, exactly where Reconstructionist Judaism now stands on some of these issues. But if you observed Reconstructionist people, their observances were much more conservative than Reform, but their beliefs were more than Reform, because Reform Judaism at that time did hold to a God, whereas Reconstructionist Judaism at its outset questioned the idea of God.
In their situation, the Jewish culture became very important.
Yes, thank you.
So that was a
yeah.
big part of Reconstructionist Judaism, that the culture of Judaism needs to be maintained. And people need to self-identify as Jewish, and it really matters that they
live as Jews.
They're the families together and doing the same thing as Jews. So it's not just believe anything you want, by no means, but it's for those of us who are sort of used to, worshiping God, them not so much. And I think if you would ask them, they would say, well, we're sort of trying to be more fitting in with modern life, because only crazy people talk about God all the time. So you think that's fair enough? I think they
to some degree,
wanted to avoid openly talking about God but they didn't feel it was cool and modern. I think that's why most of these things, the newer strains of Judaism developed in Germany, is because at that point, I would say the 1850s through maybe the 1930s, German Christians were like, well, it's the Bible, but it's really just stories. And now we're going to continue. We're going to prove to you it's just stories, and that they would spend a lot of time doing that. But all these things came out of Germany with the desire of Jewish people to live happily within Germany, which is harder than we would think.
Okay. Yes, and let me emphasize or re-emphasize what Patrice said. There was a strong commitment to Jewish culture and identity, which has religious overtones, but there wasn't a strong commitment to Jewish religiosity in that sense. That if that distinction is meaningful to you. Fair enough? Okay. Now,
It's 3 minutes to 8.
yeah, I don't think we dare get into the next question.
No, I don't think so either. We can postpone it. We can do some of the ones that I've been wanting to do for now,
Yeah,
like
but we can
6
do
months.
we can do at least one. The other question that came along with what is Reconstructionist Judaism is the one that we're not going to start at this particular point in time. It's the one that we bounced around a little before we turned everybody on. Okay.
You mean opened up the airwaves so they
Yeah,
could see?
something like that.
These are all good.
Oh,
And then
okay.
there's a whole bunch of
No,
other
no, no.
ones.
I was trying to read the note there.
Oh, so we're gonna
I would say, yeah,
Yeah,
I
okay.
would say take it from the top.
first of all, this what we're gonna do next is a list. See, it's a
Oh, okay.
oh okay, yes,
Yes, Virginia.
Okay,
Virginia, do
Okay,
you?
I'm learning this new screen. Unmute. Where is it?
Alright.
Okay, what happened that you just described sounds a lot like what's happening in America now and that movie Religiosity and how the media, movies and so on have done a similar thing, some similar task in reducing God and taking God out of our a lot of of our society where he would always be.
It may look like that on the surface. I would suggest it's radically different in a number of ways. First of all, the rise of Reconstructionism wasn't an anti-religious thing. It was an attempt to apply what was an ancient faith, going back, remember now, 3,400 years, to make it more relevant to people around them.
Okay.
And remember what Patrice said. There was a cultural and identity commitment, and the practices were maintained. And there are synagogues. It is not that the synagogue is now not a barn house.
what's a barn house?
A barn or a house barn, whatever.
Like a farmer's
Yeah,
barn?
a farmer's
Oh,
barn.
okay.
Yeah, or it's not a movie theater. It is still a synagogue,
Okay.
right? Fair enough.
Yeah,
And
I get it. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
yeah, and
Oh,
what's happening today is something that's been developing now, as Patrice already suggested, for a good couple centuries. It developed in Europe, it developed in America as well, and that is a questioning of the reliability as well as the relevance of the biblical text and material and stuff that's based on it. This is not it is not, how should I put it? It's not media driven. The reason it's connected at all to media is if you're a person at all in the modern age, guess what? You'll be using media. Media in and of itself is neutral. In our day and age, and this has happened in religious circles most frequently, the media has become a boogeyman.
That's not good.
That's not good, and it is completely wrong. It's a very twisted view of media and the use of media. Fair enough?
I think so. When one recognizes that media has basically two options, entertainment and information, we have to balance those two concepts when participating in it.
When you use the word media, can you give me examples of what you're saying? What media are you referring to?
Because we're using media right now.
You can't fling around this word.
Yeah, Exactly, exactly. And then there is, you know, you have YouTube, and then you have all the congregations on YouTube and the different forms of Judaism there. And you have movies, the movie industry, and all the different forms of Christianity and ideals of Christianity. And then you have the philosophers on giving their opinions, and you just have to sit there and balance it with reality, and balance it with the teachings. I mean, I learned so much in your classes, Rabbi, and from your messages, Rabbi Patrice, that I sit and go, well, wait a minute, you missed this over here. If you had looked at the archaeology, if you had talked to um, gone to the book of the building, the book of the scrolls, and listened to Adolf, you would know that what you're saying has question of being accurate. And then I just sit back and go, okay, I learned something, and I don't agree with this person.
Mm-hmm. That's both the beauty and the fear that we have, is that when you have freedom of information and freedom of religion and freedom of the first amendment freedoms, everything can be publicized. Everything can be, here, listen to this. Oh, over here, listen to this. Oh, over here, listen to this. And it's both a curse and a blessing. But I'd rather have it be more stuff rather than just this stuff. This is all you're permitted to see. So yeah, it is a fine line, but it's, I think, exercising what the Constitution says about freedom of religion, freedom of the press, all the freedoms that we have. It can be difficult sometimes.
And frankly, the major issues nowadays are not movies, nor is it TV.
Because there's plenty of believing movies. They're on, when you go on to stream something on Netflix or any of the bigger streamings, there's just a million Christian movies, just tons of them.
And I'm referring also to non-religious movies.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of good stuff out there. But the main issues, the main driving forces in media today are what are called social media.
Mm-hmm.
The internet and the stuff like TikTok and Instagram and X, and you build on all of those. And all of those can be sources of accurate information, and they can be purveyors of misinformation. And it depends on the individuals that are involved and their expertise and their education in the fields in which they seek to proclaim their information. So
I think that that's not something new. I just think
No.
there's more ways that they can get their word out.
yeah, yes.
I
And
don't think it's worse than ever. I think it's about having grown up during the 60s. It's very familiar to me, right?
Yeah.
Would you say?
So it's too easy to jump on the bandwagon that's out there in some circles and blame the media. No.
Or all the media does is lie.
Yeah.
Well, media can be used for good or for bad ends. You know, it doesn't have to be always lying.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And I'm going to say something semi-political here, but
Uh-oh.
I'm going to say it because I have a graduate degree in the field of communications. Patrice and both our daughter Eve and son-in-law John have degrees in the fields of communications. These are part of the fields we studied. There's a lot of people who try to blame mainstream media. That's a dumb statement. when you're using it negatively? Why is it called mainstream media? Because it's the mainstream.
There is something that is the mainstream, and then there's other things that are not the mainstream.
Most of those blaming mainstream media are on the fringes, and you don't want to be on the fringes of virtually anything.
Well, maybe they do.
Oh,
these
I mean, they
people.
do, but I mean in general, okay?
It's not wise.
Yeah, not wise. So, yeah, and I heard somebody respond very vocally to my original statement. Thank you for that response. It was very encouraging. Okay, now we have wandered a few more minutes down the road.
Yeah.
Do we have time to deal with any of these?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
then go
think
ahead. Then go.
Just even, all right, I wanted to say to people, this is from a website called Jew Belong. It's like you belong, but it's Jew Belong, JEWBELONG, which is a great website to go and explore, especially if you come from a Gentile background and you want to know how Gentiles can fit into the Jewish community. And it just gives you, it's a very peppy and upbeat place to go. Very positive about anyone who's interested in Judaism. It's really trying to make people who are not experts in Judaism to understand how they fit in and why this is a great thing to investigate. And it's aiming a lot at intermarried couples, where one of the person in the couple are Jewish and the other one isn't. So this is from Jew Belong, and basically it says here you can even read the statement. Click here to download the PDF, and this is a PDF about current anti-Semitic problems in America. All right, so they're giving you a bird's eye view of anti-Semitic problems in the present. Now, we printed this off February 11th, 2023. And since October 6th, 2023, this has even become more relevant, because some of these things that they were printing out a year ago, it's like more and more people, oh, I heard about that, or oh, I know that, and it wouldn't have been like this, if there was no October 6th. So,
October 7th.
whatever, yeah, whatever it is.
It's January 6th and October 7th.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Math was never a strong suit. I can do math, not in my viewpoint very much. All right, number one, saying that
And that's
numbers aren't in my viewpoint. All right. These statements that they make are very handy if someone you know, or like at Thanksgiving, but people you work with, your next door neighbor, people that you happen to chat with, these sort of hit at things that you will hear, and it gives you some background with which to chat with them without getting mad and punching them. Sometimes you can meet a stranger who's saying these things, and in your mind you're thinking, I want to punch you. Unless that's just me. Oh no, Patrice, it's just you. Okay, number one, being a Zionist means you stand for a safe and secure Israel, period. If you don't agree with all of Israel's policies, that's okay, but it's a different conversation, right? I don't agree with all the policies that America does. And I still think I'm a pretty good American. And the same is true about Israel. Just because they're Israelis doesn't mean that an individual person is good, bad, godly, ungodly. In other words, they're still human beings in a nation. The nation is blessed by God, for sure. I think God can bless America too. Sometimes it's great. But all that Zionism means, because people who don't understand, or they blame Zionism for polluting all Jews. So evidently all Jews are Zionists, and that's terrible, because whatever they say, this and this and that. here's what being a Zionist means. It means you stand for a safe and secure Israel. If we as American Jews don't believe in all of Israel's policies, that's okay. But it's a different conversation. There's something about the common knowledge about Jews around the world where many, many people who are not Jewish think that every single Jew they meet is a Zionist, and that would be terrible. And it's a little more complicated than that. And I think we shouldn't get caught up in the idea that no matter what is going on in Israel, that's perfect, and we can't criticize it. When you go to Israel itself, they criticize their own government more than we criticize ours. That's normal, and I think it's good to keep that. It seems to be a kind of a healthy idea, because you don't want to declare a human nation perfect. That will be very disappointing to you.
Further on that, to build on what Patricia said, we just referenced October 7th. On October 6th, there were still record numbers of people in Israel protesting against the Israeli government. And I mean real major record numbers of.
For 9 months they had been in the streets.
Yes. Mm-hmm. They've been doing that for 9 months. Demonstrations that were proportionally as profound as some of the largest that we've ever had in the United States as well. Things changed on October 7th, but the protests were against the Israeli government. Now, it's the same Israeli government. They've added to it a handful of people as part of the war cabinet, but by and large, it's the same Israeli government that is still in place. Guess what's going to happen if and when things die down? The protests will happen all over again. Just to give you an idea, the present Israeli government, the political party or the political grouping that is in charge, or groupings that are in charge of the government right now, the major party, the majority, it's not a majority party, but the largest party in the Israeli Knesset or parliament, was supported by somewhere around 35 to 38% of the Israeli population. The largest party, and it's the party that's controlling the government, is a minority party in Israel. So you need to know that that's part of the picture. Now, the other thing I wanted to reflect on is the term Zionist. Where does the term Zionist come from? Well, if you're part of our synagogue services, you'd better know. Because when we bring the scroll out of the ark, the Torah scroll out of the ark, we do Vayi ben Soa. And the second part of Vayi ben Soa is what? For the law will go forth out of Zion. So what is Zion? Zion is another name for Jerusalem, because one of the mountains in Jerusalem is in fact Mount Zion. So, as Patrice said, or as this says, being a Zionist means you stand for a safe and secure Israel, that Israel is in fact a legitimate nation, and that Jerusalem is part of that nation. That's what makes you a Zionist. All right. I think we've covered
Fair
that.
enough.
Fair enough. And I think we should probably stop at that point.
Oh, I was going to do number 2. It doesn't take long.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
going to ask you guys, what percentage of the American population is Jewish? What percentage is Jewish? Do, 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 do. I wouldn't have known either. Do, 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 do. Well, she said 1 or 2%. On here, 1.8% of the population of the United States. 1.8% of the population is Jewish. But, and here's the but. So, with that small of a percentage of Americans being Jewish, of a year ago, so this is way before any of these demonstrations that we've seen on about October 7th, that Jews are the targets of 60% of hate crimes in the United States. Less than 2% of the population, but the targets of 60% of the hate crimes.
And there has been, according to those who've tracked this, both in the United States government as well as in Jewish organizations and institutions, there's been a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism that dates back now about 7 or 8 years. It first started rising about 7 or 8 years ago. Now, since October 7th, the increase of anti-Semitism in the United States has risen to about 300%. There's been a 300% increase in anti-Semitism in the United States since October 7th. Please, now again, hear what I said. The previous 7 years saw a dramatic
It was already on the rise
in anti-Semitism, going back to about 7 or 8 years ago. Dramatic rise. That rise then, in a sense, exploded.
exponentially bigger.
By an increase of 300% since October the 7th. Okay? And on that joyful news,
We've brought you down now.
on that joyful news,
not going to skipping
we'll
with joy
conclude.
out the door anymore. But I think it's good to be able to say something, because sometimes we're just caught flat-footed and you're going because somebody said something totally obnoxious and wrong, and you don't quite know how to jump in with but wait, there's more kind of thing.
This just popped into my mind. It shouldn't just have popped into my mind. I wrote about it in the Olive Tree Connection many years ago.
Almost 50 years ago.
Even to this day, many of those who are anti-media also believe that Jews control the media. So now when you attack, you need to understand that many of those attacking the media are also believers that Jews control the media. So what does that make them? That makes them also anti-Jewish. Both intentionally and unintentionally.
It's out of ignorance, mainly.
It's out of ignorance. But you need to be aware of that.
And that's for film. That's been true since film was brought to the public back in the early 1900 to 1910, 1915. In there was films brought to the public. And from that time, films have been blamed by, they're scripted by Jews, the Jews run the studios, and it goes on. And that's been pretty much stayed the same for over a century.
Yeah.
So if there's anything bad about movies, guess whose fault it is? Jewish people, because they own
or
control the film studios. Well, they owned them
Yeah.
to begin with, and therefore all the writers are Jewish. I mean, you can just spread that out. Once you've made that statement, you can spread it out, and it covers all these problems. But we have to realize that it's not that easy, and there is not one religion that controls everything. Yeah, without getting into number 5 or whatever.
Oh, and by the way, and this is a quote from the Olive Tree Connection, and the case was stronger then than it is now. At that point in time, some people had done some studies on how much of the media, the popular media at that time, was controlled by Jews. At that point in time, if I remember correctly, it was 3%. And by the way, at that point in time, guess what? The Jewish people were 3% of the population of the country. So, there you go. Um, yeah, I think we're more than done.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions on any of that stuff that we just tossed at you in the last 10 or 15 minutes?
Don't be depressed. If we're with God, we're doing fine.
You're talking about it reminds me of a story I read, and you may bring it up in class or so on, of the man who was reading the, let's just say the Palestinian newspaper and laughing and smiling. And his friend asks him, "Why are you reading their paper? They talk about how horrible we are." He goes, "Yes, but we own everything."
Yeah, that might be misunderstood. So I would keep that in the family. Or we can say God owns everything. That's
No, to be precise, because the papers say, the paper that the guy was reading say that we own everything.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's not true.
yeah. I know. But it made him feel good.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
would you like to close in prayer then?
Sure.
Oh, and then let me think. Are we on a regular schedule in March?
I don't know. I just read. I got it.
I
I got a
believe-
newspaper from Orthodox in the mail today, and it's listed on there for the next for March and for April when Stump the Stars is.
Okay, so look either in your mail or by way of email if you're getting the newsletter by way of email. I believe the dates are correct in there, and I think the dates are again as normal, the second and fourth.
I think you're right.
No, wait a second. The fourth may not be. The fourth may be the Purim party. In which case,
Well, I'll give you the date of the Purim party if I had my purse. I would. The Purim party is on Saturday, March, like right around on the 23rd.
I'm going to grab one of the papers, and I think
Okay, you want to get one of the papers
I believe that's the case.
because my calendar is insufficient to confirm or deny when Purim is. But it's in about a month.
The other thing that happened to me today was when I went to look for the link in my mailbox, it was not in my mailbox. It was sent to my spam because it did not come from Congregation or Kadash. It came from com something.
Well, we use email services anymore to send out our email because it simplifies that process. And right now, our emailing list is several hundred. So if you think that you don't have your correct email address, you can call Joe at the office. Virginia Matt has gone to Nashville, and so now it's Joe Cook who is
Why?
Joe. Well, it's a complicated story, and so Joe Cook is now the administrative assistant in the office, and you can call the congregation office and tell him you don't think you're getting the email, and he'll put you on the list.
Okay, the calendar is March 9th. This,
No, I got it. It just went to my spam box because it wasn't coming from Congregation or Kadash. It was coming from a new
Yeah, a new
yeah, came from
email
Ma-
server.
yeah, came from MailChimp.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So here's the okay.
And
You're breaking up.
You're breaking
Virginia.
up,
We
Virginia.
can't hear what you're saying.
All right. So here's the.
um
You're still breaking up, Virginia. So I think.
Just call Joe if you're unsure about it.
All right. March 9th is the second Saturday in March. Stump the Stars is on. The fourth Saturday in March is the Purim party, March 23rd. And then there's also some disruption in our schedule in April because then we're dealing with Passover. So the first Saturday of April, April 6th, we are on.
Yeah, but this other one is during Passover. It doesn't affect us as far as this goes. We're on April 27th.
Yes. But as I'm looking at it, that may be the night that we were having that would normally be the night that we have our Seder.
We
our
can
family
talk
Seder.
about this when everybody's not waiting for you.
Yes. So there is a potential disruption as well in April.
So we're only doing this once in March
Once in March,
and possibly once in April.
yes, and possibly once in April. Okay.
To be determined.
Okay, there we go. I thought we'd have some clarity, but we don't have total clarity. But we know when we're next going to be on. All right.
Ready?
Yes.
Let's pray. Avinu Malchinu, our Father and our King, thank you for being faithful to us. Thank you for protecting us and our loved ones, our families. You are a gracious God, and help us to continually walk with you. Help us to find your footsteps and follow the path that you are providing for us day by day, week by week, and help us in our faith so that we can learn to trust you more every week. Thank you. B'Shem Yeshua Meshachenu, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
Amen.